Couldn't believe it. I was looking for a thigh to slap.
Spiking someone's banana with blood, you're making a much better argument than the fair trade movement ever has.
This week I attended 2 events of an experimental bent, the first of which, this Sunday gone, was Roulade No. 1 in Limehouse at the Husk Cafe Arts venue. Conceived and edited by Lou Watkins and Wayne Holloway Smith, this was pitched as a one-day-only walk-through magazine. Poems and artwork were printed onto large pages and hung from the ceiling, and were accompanied by interactive micro-performances and video projections. Now, this being East London, something like Roulade could come across as a bit of a hipster honeypot. But to be hipster, you've really got to be bathing in the glow of your own whimsy or hyper-ironic posturing. This was more straightforwardly sincere, a genuinely ambitious effort. As you can tell from the background noise, there wasn't exactly a reverential atmosphere, and I could peruse the poems at my leisure.
You know, I don't think I've ever had one. We couldn't believe it. I was looking for a thigh to slap. The world's most famous artist looked at him, then he looked at me, then he looked out the grimy little window of the room, saw a pigeon roosting, and repeated the man who needs no introduction's words out loud.
That's Alex MacDonald, and I think the idea here is that he's in the middle of a page that has come to life. The actual readings only lasted a few minutes, which is a welcome change from poets reading long sets over a number of hours, especially on a Sunday night. There was an after-party, but that I did not go to, for it was time to sidle off back into the icy night.
How much of that is personal experience?
I've had Skype conversations before. So, in that sense, it's deeply personal.
The Poetry Inquisition, from whence I've just returned, was an altogether different proposition. This was in Peckham, at the Small White Elephant Cafe, and hosted by 13 Pages. The idea was inspired by Jeremy Paxman's comments about contemporary poetry off the back of judging the Forward Prizes earlier this year, where he said poets ought to explain themselves before an inquisition. The format for the evening, therefore, was to have poets read, and thereafter to have them grilled by a panel which included at least one non-poet or ordinary member of the public, as stipulated by Paxman. The main readers of the night were Jack Underwood, and my cohort at Sidekick Books, Kirsty Irving.
So this is a poem, roughly about those two things. My sister. 2 summers ago, when I was going nuts, I thought my sister's ghost lived in our garden. My shoulders felt warm, and I confided. Let me say she was real then, as a tongue you can bite. Let me say I knew she was very good at hockey, and fun as a tent.
But also, you're being very weird and quite perverse to perform a prank which you say doesn't really fully make sense. So what I wanted to ask was, as a poet, to what extent is your imperative to kind of honourably and honestly bring the totality of human suffering into consciousness, and how much is it to use surreal and sort of obscure strategies to dick it?
My personal opinion? This is exactly the direction British poetry culture should be moving in. I mean that. The format here worked really well. The panel were able to express the sort of everyday healthy scepticism that's normally waved away or more usually not given any voice at all, and the poets being interrogated were given plenty of opportunity to state their case and expound their philosophy.
It's something that's happening. It's a sort of contingent, ephemeral, fugitive, to borrow from Baudelaire. That's a literary reference. Sort of mass that's beyond the realms of comprehension. I think that's what a poem does. I think I'm being very consistent when I say that that's what a poem does. Okay. It investigates these things that cannot be described, and it posits various systems which might enhance our understanding or grapple with it, but allow that grappling to remain open-ended, because if you don't remain open-ended, then you can't uphold the complexity and strangeness of the thing that you're dealing with in the first place.
So you don't know what it is?
Do you not think there would be more value in writing poetry with things you do understand, so that people that don't appreciate poetry might then start to appreciate poetry? So then you have more kind of disciples, if you will, trying to find out the answers to the questions you don't know.
I suppose given...
After the panel had their turn, the audience were given a chance to ask questions. I couldn't really resist putting Jack on the spot.
It's like there's a sort of an element of a cult of personality around selling poetry.
No, when I said that in the context of a question which was asking me what you got compared to Emily Beverly or Sam, and we were conflating already in that question the idea of author and text. So I certainly wouldn't say you get me as a kind of cult of celebrity. I mean, what kind of celebrity turns up and pays £4 for a glass of wine and doesn't get paid themselves? No offence.
But is that what they're getting from your poetry? I mean, if they're choosing your book over Emily's and Sam's, is it because they want like a piece of you more than them?
No, it's because they want their poems over mine, isn't it? They could buy both, and if they can't, then that's okay.
I'm trying to get at what distinguishes them, and if it comes down to say something
You're not
like
gonna
something.
Give yourself I can see okay.
The questions weren't just about style and accessibility either. The panel ventured into fraught topics like, were the poets being perhaps a little exploitative? Was there an element of love and theft?
Particularly with the Shogo Says poems, like you're just unfolding a kind of oriental backdrop, like a black and white minstrel show, and a lot of the poems, like poetry, kind of rides off that. Do you worry about that you're kind of orientalizing?
It's definitely foremost in my mind.
The thing is, I think Paxman was right, even if he said what he said in a rather crass way. At one point it might have been a radical and brave notion to let the poetry itself do the talking and refuse to descend to defending it. Nowadays it feels kind of aloof and boring. Testing poets and their work in this way is inevitably going to lead to less stilted conversations. Honestly, I think the Poetry Inquisition is a brilliant idea and we should be having events like these up and down the country.
What exactly, how would you justify any sort of value in telling us that you've borrowed that image from Chaucer? Because for someone that doesn't write poetry and hasn't read Chaucer, that just makes me think,
Well, I've only read that Chaucer, if that makes you feel any better.